Want to get these episodes early? Head over to anchor.fm/Campfire Ashes or wherever you find your podcast to be able to check this out early before it hits YouTube. We're lost, aren't we? Edward sighed. No, if you drive in one direction long enough, you'll end up somewhere you know. Yeah, but you've made 4 turns since we got lost, and you're not even taking your own advice. Maddie shook her head and then her phone violently. How are there still parts of America with this big of a dead zone? They've been driving aimlessly when Ed thought it would make a great shortcut to take off of Route 30 and make it back in time, but that was 2 hours ago. Worse, he prided himself on living his life on E. Everyone would say, someday you're going to run out of gas, and it would bite him. In the back of his head, he knew that it was likely going to be this day. And then 15 minutes later, he got bit. The full moon lit the barrens in a light blue hue, and the crisp air blanketed the ground with a thick mist. It was deathly quiet. Being so far removed from civilization, the background hum of electricity was nowhere to be found. It was unnerving to some. Maddie hated it. She walked back and forth to the street, phone held high in the air, searching for a single bar. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one's coming. I don't even know why you're looking for a signal. And she stomped around in a huff and leaned against the car. I couldn't get directions even if I wanted to. Someone's eventually going to come down the road. Edward sat on the ground with his back to the bumper, peering down the road, hoping for a pair of headlights to shine back. It's New Jersey. There's too many people here. There's too many people that live around the area. There's no way a road stays deserted forever. Yeah, but long enough to be eaten by wolves. Edward scoffed. We don't even have wolves, and the coyotes are too scared to do anything to us. And she quickly opened the door and closed it on her, holding it to her like a shield. How do you know that? Suddenly, a shrill, bleating sound cut through the conversation. Maddie immediately fell back into the car and slammed the door, and Edward jumped up and tried to look into the woods to see what had made the noise. Subconsciously, though, he was inching towards his own door. A loud branch snap made him open the door and slide inside. He looked up and down the tree line for anything that might be coming out. Her eyes never left the tree line, and she said, I'm going to haunt you if I die because you ran out of gas again. And her eyes went wide with fright. It flew out of the dark so quickly that they couldn't adjust their eyes. It clipped the rooftop, sending shards of window glass showering onto Ed and Maddie. Its mass slammed onto the hood, snarling and scraping sharp talons as they cut into the paint with harsh grating. It flailed wildly and gained its footing. A large pair of hoods carved deep grooves into the metal as it stood upright. It flapped its large black-like wings, lifting the heft of its weight into the air, then slammed back onto the hood. From the car, the two could only see the dark mass of fur expanding, contracting as it breathed. It screeched again, a mix of husky growl and goat scream, and hunched over. And with another bleat of its wings, it shambled off to the car and onto the road. And it turned and peered into the car, red eyes glaring at the pair inside. If you grew up in this state, you always knew, you're always worried, that someday you'd come to face with this monster. Curled horns, claws, matted fur, wings, and hooves. A campfire tale told by Cub Scouts around, and it stood in front of them. A defiant legend and a nightmare. All Edward could do was just sit back and lock his doors. But the sound startled the beast. Nails scraped ferociously at the door. The monster straightened its form, flinging its wing back, and kicked the door in with its hooves. The force folded the door in half, and forced Edward out of his driver's seat and into Maddie's lap. It circled the car, scraping its claws against the quarter panels, hooves stomping sharply against the asphalt. Those red eyes were locked onto the two trapped inside, scrambling to stay as far away from the monster as they could, shifting from seat to seat to seat. As it neared the front of the car, it wheeled around and slammed both fists into the hood of the car, screaming at Ed and Maddie. And just as suddenly it came crashing into their lives, it was into the air, flapping, with an odd grace that felt out of place from this brutish stature. And after a few minutes, only the sound of the gentle rustling pine trees. Their panic breathing lasted for what seemed like hours. and their eyes darted back and forth where it was actually hours. They were terrified that the thing could come back at any moment and attack again. But as the light finally started to crest over the pines, it felt like the nightmare was over. They didn't talk the entire time. They just took turns staring in the direction the other had prior, too afraid to blink or too afraid that the other would have missed movement. They didn't dare go outside. They just huddled in the center of the car until finally, shortly after daybreak, a car finally broke the horizon. Edward flailed his hands out the window, too terrified to open the door himself and get out to flag the car down. It slowed and parked across the street. Edward crawled out of the passenger side window, scraping off what glass was left on him when the car came to a stop. Glass crunched under his feet, and the car was in a shambles, claw marks, dents, gashes with tufts of hair caught in small crevices. The motorist looked and said, "What the hell happened?" Edward looked at Maddie, who was shaking her head. Her eyes were bulging and bewildered. Her head still in a swivel. No one would believe what they saw. She didn't even believe what they saw. He couldn't believe what they saw. And she shrugged when he mouthed, "What do we say?" They both looked at each other for a moment, and an unspoken agreement came. And he turned and threw up his hands and said, "You should have seen the size of that buck. It came out of nowhere."